Hey, yo, what's good, everyone? Twisted here with the Open Sorcery, and today I want to go ahead and talk about a fable by Aesop titled The Hares and the Frogs. Now, this right here follows another one of Aesop's fables that I went ahead and covered previously titled The Lion and the Mouse. And that one had its own particular moral to the story, its own central point. And, this one that I'm about to go ahead and recite differs a bit, what have you, but I think it's a pretty interesting one to cover and add some additional food for thought for, reflection and what have you. Now, there's been other ones that I've covered, well, not fables of Aesop yet, per se, but other stories and tales, koans, and so on that have their own morals within them and their own points, and I can go ahead and link all of those in the description for the YouTube posting of this. Now, let me actually get into the Hares and the Frogs fable itself. So, I'm going to go ahead and read a couple paragraphs, what have you, and then there will be a little summarizing sentence, what have you, that puts it a little bit more so into plain English, you could say. So, here we go. Once upon a time, the hares, driven desperate by the many enemies that compassed them about on every side, came to the sad resolution that there was nothing left for them but to make away with themselves, one and all. Off they scudded to a nearby lake, determined to drown themselves as the most miserable of creatures. A shoal of frogs, seated upon the bank, frightened at the approach of the hares, leaped in the greatest alarm and confusion into the water. Nay then, my friends, said a hare that was foremost, our case is not so desperate yet, for here are other poor creatures more faint-hearted than ourselves. So here goes this one particular sentence that puts a little more so into plain modern English. However unfortunate we may think we are, there is always someone worse off than ourselves. So take a moment to think about that and what have you. Pretty much it's one of those sort of instances of being able to put yourself into someone else's shoes that you may come across or what have you, and recognize that, things aren't necessarily so bad. And I want to go ahead and kind of dial back and kind of also mention that there was a previous topic that I covered, a previous idea or theory or what have you, however you want to go ahead and label and categorize it, titled Big Fish, Little Pond. And this sort of phenomena was all about how we view ourselves relative to others, right? So depending on the size of the environment, what have you, we may go ahead and see ourselves as more than or less than our peers or people who surround us, who are part of said community, or what have you, relative to us and relative to what it is that we know or can do, or so on and so forth. I think that's rather poignant in regards to this tale, what have you, in the sense of the making comparisons and going ahead and trying to see how we view not only ourselves but our circumstances, right? And in this case, more so seeing that if we have a negative perspective of ourselves and our circumstances, that there is very likely somebody else who's going ahead and having a worse time than us, who has their own issues, their own struggles, their own, hurt, their own pain, all these sorts of things that, we just kind of got to go ahead and, every once in a while, every so often, just be like, what? Relative to what someone else may be going through, things aren't as bad. And kind of like bring yourself to a more so balanced, more so, baseline area where you can just be okay with how things are, or willing to go ahead and deal with whatever sort of struggle that you're going through, and recognize that with the ebbs and flows of life, those sort of struggles will end, and there will be, a grace period, or, a rising up from that, and so on and so forth, that if you're dealing with some lows, there will be highs, and so on and so forth of fluctuation back and forth to whatever extent. But yes, when I go ahead and think about this as well in terms of, relative circumstances, right? I go ahead and think about a magical axiom, a spiritual axiom of as above, so below, as within, so without. And in regards to this, think about exactly, you know, the macrocosms above us and the microcosms below us. Or you could say the macrocosm, that exists within us or potentially without us. And the microcosms that exist within or potentially without us. And what have you. But in regards to this, right? Everything is relative in that sort of sense. Everything is determined on your own perspective and how you view things. So, we, as human beings, are life forms of a certain nature and manner and size, and we think that, our perspective is normal to us, and our perspective is regular to us, and that other things are irregular in relation to us, what have you. But we may go ahead and be bigger or smaller than other things. Or in the case of this particular fable, this particular story with the moral within it, we may go ahead and have situations that are better or worse than others in that sort of comparison. And just go ahead and think to yourself, how are things better for me? How is it that, I can be appreciative and grateful and thankful for what I got? For what, other people that I care about got, or for what others got, and all that sort of thing. Or go ahead and recognize those who are without, and those who do not necessarily have other things, what have you. And also recognize what you may be lacking as well, or that others go ahead and have in this manner of reflection. And both of them, whether you're looking at what you have or what you don't have in relation to others, I think the point of doing so is to go ahead and recognize, how can I grow from this? How is it that I can either capitalize on the strengths of myself, my character, my being, and work on the weaknesses and things that I gotta shore up, things I gotta go have a stronger supply of, and what have you. Or even how you can go ahead and help others who may not have as good of circumstances as you happen to have yourself. And it makes me go ahead and think about a particular instance. At the time of this recording, it would have been earlier today, and all that sort of thing. About not necessarily giving or being charitous in this particular instance, but more so along the lines of relative circumstances in of itself. And I'll explain what I mean in regards to not necessarily being charitous in this particular instance. So, when I was going ahead out and about of my day, and I went ahead and I got some breakfast at a local small business restaurant, what have you. And after having my breakfast, I went ahead out the door, and there was a homeless man who was on the corner of the building, going ahead and speaking to the different patrons of that restaurant as they exited out of said building, trying to go ahead and beg and ask for change of whatever sort. Now, in knowing the area itself, and him not being the first homeless person and individual that I've come across, I already am aware in this particular context, I should say, an instance that this particular individual, while there may have been a chance that, if I went ahead and gave him some change, he was going to go ahead and use it for food. The more likely case, because of the area, was that he was going to go ahead and pay for some drugs, pay for some dope, go ahead and get high, go ahead and feed his addiction. Now, not only was it based on the circumstances, the area, the fact that, once I got past him, I could see the people who are usually dealing dope down the street going ahead and stationed where they're at, usually, for the most part. But in observing his behavior in of himself, he was just not having a good day. He was trying to get his next fix. He was trying to find that equilibrium in of itself. So, that goes ahead and explains what I said earlier of, in this particular instance, I was not necessarily charitous. I did not necessarily give him the change I had on hand of however many singles and what have you, and I went about my day. But in bringing that up, right, and reflecting upon this in relation to having read Aesop's fable of the hares and the frogs, shortly then afterward, I went ahead and thought to myself, you know what? My circumstances are not necessarily as bad as his. While, granted, in general, if someone is homeless, does not necessarily mean that every single homeless person has worse off circumstances than those who seemingly have the material comforts, shelter, food, water, so on and so forth, of a conventional means, either an apartment or a home or what have you. But in this particular instance, with this particular homeless man, going ahead and looking in his behavior being that he in himself was craving to feed that addiction, and that he was likely not having much unto himself or to his name, and suffering because of it. In that relative circumstance, I'm not necessarily as bad off as he is. And in generally speaking, I can be appreciative that the basic creature comforts, the basic sort of things that I have within my life of shelter, food, water, and people around me that either I can support or they can support me, and so on and so forth, I can be very grateful for that and recognize that, at any given point in time, I may not have any of those sorts of resources or lack one or what have you. And the same goes for others as well. As sure as certain things may be, there can come a time where, even if you prepare, or likely in the case many people are unprepared, many people happen to be comfortable with their circumstances, that goes ahead and gets taken away from them because they feel like it is something that will be continually given unto them, or that they will have in abundance and not prepare for worse off times. But just generally speaking, having that appreciation, that thankfulness, that gratitude to, yourself, to the different beings that may be working in your favor of a, spiritual nature, for those who may interact with angels or gods, goddesses, different elementals, and so on and so forth, or those who happen to believe in a higher power, or whatever the case may be. Or if you are more so of a dependent person, or, say a younger person, or whatever, having someone provide these things for you in some way, shape, or form, or whatever the case may be, or even elderly people who may need providers and caretakers for their basic daily needs. But the bottom line being that I wanted to go ahead and get across, and sharing my own thoughts, 2 cents, my own sort of thing in relation to this is, go ahead and recognize the relative circumstances that you have with others, and having a better off circumstance that someone else may have, or even if you have less, what have you. And maybe some people have more than you do, or seemingly may go ahead and have more than you do, or may seemingly have more material things, but don't necessarily have as much of a fulfilling life and all that, or recognizing that they have their own struggles, being appreciative and grateful for what you got going for you, and all that sort of thing. And generally speaking, as the one particular sentence blurb that I read earlier stated, however unfortunate we may think we are, there's always someone worse off than ourselves. So, once again, this has been my thoughts and 2 cents on the hares and the frogs, and a general idea of relative circumstances being relayed in this fable. So, this has been Twisted with the Open Word Sorcery, and stay frosty, Neguses. Peace.